I'm Alice Vale.
And I'm Monsignor Charles Minor. Most parents would react in an understandably negative way if they learned one of their children had leukemia. Well, we'll meet a special man who reacted in a positive manner that has helped not only his own daughter, but countless other children.
Also in this program, we'll take a look at the ministry of Billy Graham and some of his predecessors and peers, including the late Bishop Fulton J. Sheen. Our short segments will feature a look at a saintly comic book and a mini history lesson.
When John Canuzzo first learned that his daughter Babe had leukemia 7 years ago, he was determined he was going to do everything he could to beat the disease. Since that time, his effort in combating leukemia has been unparalleled and beautifully unselfish. John Canuzzo is a builder of dreams. Dream homes, that is. From these blueprints, John engineers the construction of luxury homes, primarily in the area of Voorhees Township, New Jersey. But John is also the builder of a different kind of dream, one that had its origins not in a set of blueprints, but rather in John Canuzzo's heart. It was a very real situation which provided the impetus for John's dream. 7 years ago, John, his wife Joan, and their daughter Babe shared a trying experience. Babe was complaining of pains in her legs off and on, but John dismissed them as growing pains. When the pains persisted, Joan took Babe for a checkup. Then an otherwise typical morning for John was interrupted by the ring of the telephone and bad news from the doctor. Babe had been diagnosed as having leukemia, the most common form of childhood cancer. After an initial reaction of grief and confusion, John was determined that his family was going to lick leukemia, and he personally was going to help the staff at Children's Hospital who were caring for Babe. And this is how our dream began.
That guy says, give me a job. Give me something that I could do for you, for the hospital. Give me any kind of a chore. Let me be a part of this team. I says, you know, I don't necessarily want to sit on committees. I just like to have something to do that I feel I could do.
All done.
You want to get your temperature taken now, Dave? Come on, let's go get your
It didn't take long for the doctors at the hospital to find a job for John.
When Dr. Evans and Dr. Donaldson approached me about getting involved in a home away from home. Of course, at that time it was not called the Ronald McDonald House. It was an idea that Dr. Evans came up with, that if we can buy a house and build it like an apartment, but it would be like a home, where people could stay overnight while their kids were being in the hospital. And even if the kids had to come in town, that the kids could live at this house and be treated at the hospital as an outpatient. We related to that, and we said, Doctor, whatever you need, you know, we would be glad to be a part of this thing. And I said, what an opportunity for me, being a builder, that they needed my talents as a builder.
I'm sure most of you are familiar with those green-colored, mint-flavored milkshakes which McDonald's sells. But how many of you knew that your purchase of one of them 7 years ago helped pay for the first Ronald McDonald House? Those calories you added then seem justified now, don't they?
We're just happy to be a part of the first one from its very inception, and we have just opened up the second Ronald McDonald House in the city. We were just the house was just so overused that they needed something 3 times, and we opened it up about 2 months ago, and I find that it's. I talked to the doctor, and it's filled the capacity even now.
The new Ronald McDonald House, located at 39th and Chestnut Street, is large enough for a few families to call it home. Besides living quarters, the house has a large reception area, spacious kitchen and recreation facilities, and an outdoor playground furnished with McDonaldland characters.
And it's helped a tremendous amount of people. It's helped them through it. And it's helped them to talk to other people. It's helped kids play with other kids that have it. And I think the concept has done more than they've ever anticipated.
The girl who runs the house, the manager, is Judy Bloor. She lives there with her husband and her 3 children. And she's there all the time. And she relates to me sometimes some of the things that people say. She said at one point that one couple's child had passed away. And they came back to the house and just thanked her for being there at the house, because they were from out of town, and they said if they had to go back to a hotel, they just don't know how they would have done that.
The Canuzzo Foundation was founded by John in 1974 with its sole purpose raising money for research at Children's Hospital. Some of the activities run by the Canuzos under the umbrella of the foundation are a dinner dance and the very popular and successful Share a Dream contest. But more on that later. It was Dr. Audrey Evans from Children's Hospital who was Babe Canuzo's physician, and who was instrumental in seeing John's dream become a reality. She expressed her feelings about John and the work of the foundation.
We have been fortunate here in Philadelphia in having groups that tend to support the hospital and the cancer program in particular. I think John had a very personal involvement with his daughter, who was diagnosed 7 or 8 years ago with leukemia. And the way John is motivated right from the start, he had to do something to help not only Joan, because he had big horizons, was to help other children. And the first thing he did directly was to help us with the McDonald house that we have for families to stay. And then he went on from that to create the foundation and to get his friends and families to raise funds and support the program here.
We knew, after we opened that house, we knew we had potential as a family to reach out into our market and be able to raise money. So Jody and I sat down with Dr. Evans and we said, Doc, we would like to form our own foundation, and we would like to contribute to cancer research. So she gave us a couple programs at the time, and she said to me, she said to Joni and I, we'll need about $35,000 a year. For 3 years, approximately $90,000.
She said if you were going to commit yourself, we need to know that it's going to be consistent. And the minimum time that it should be consistent perhaps is 3 years.
I got a couple of my builder friends together and I said, geez, you know, what do you think, guys? Can you sell me a house pretty cheap? Maybe we can sell, you know, some tickets, $100 tickets. And there started the birth of Share a Dream. So we set up some guidelines, and we had 1,200 tickets for every house, and I got 5 builders to sell me houses at reduced rates. First year program was fantastic. We raised $250,000 last year for Children's Hospital, and this year we did it again, and we raised another $200,000. So in the course of 2 years, over the Share a Dream benefit, we raised close to $500,000.
It has been a trying 7-year period for the Canuzos, but it has also been a very rewarding one. Happily, John and Joan's reactions to Babe's diagnosis have changed in 7 years. And fortunately for a lot of kids, that dream lives on. John Canuzo, builder of homes that are legends, continues to be a builder of dreams that are reality.
All we knew was that you died of leukemia. There was no cure, from what we knew,
Sure.
you know. So it was terrible. It was just, you know, to a point where I thought, one doctor said something about 5 years, and I thought, why bother for 5 years? It'd just be agony for 5 years. Which, you know, that lasted about 3 seconds in your head, but it did, you know, you did have thoughts like that.
And I just think God works in these kind of strange ways. He puts certain obstacles in front of you during your life, and he tests you. He wants to see how you react to those obstacles. And I think Babe is one of our obstacles, how we react to it in the family. And I think he probably is happy maybe the way we reacted to it, and he's cured Babe.
Babe Canuzo, a junior at Bishop Eustace Prep in Pennsauken, New Jersey, has been cured of leukemia thanks to a lot of prayer and the work of the staff at Children's Hospital. Thanks to John Canuzo, for other leukemia victims and their families, the dream continues.
The first priest to minister to the few Catholics living in the spacious farmlands of New Jersey in the 1700s was German-born Ferdinand Steinmeier. He was a Jesuit who, because of the persecution of Catholics in America at that time, anglicized his name and became known as Father or Mr. Farmer. That there's not a portrait or sketch of Father Farmer available is not because of a lack of interest. He slipped in and out of the pages of American history, just as he inconspicuously slipped in and out of the farmhouses to avoid arrest. One historian described him this way: tall, of pleasing countenance, graceful in manners, and full of good cheer and anecdotes. Father Farmer spent most of his time away from his residence in Philadelphia, traveling from Camden to Trenton and as far away as Perth Amboy. Masses and religious services were held in secret all over New Jersey, uniting Catholics not from church to church, but from farmhouse to farmhouse, under the spiritual leadership of Father Farmer. In 1786, Father Farmer died. At his funeral, it is said great throngs of people of all faiths came to pay tribute to this man who truly was a gospel pioneer.
Comic book heroes. Seems like they've been around forever. But this year they've been joined by another superhero. Francis, brother of the universe, better known as Saint Francis of Assisi, whose real-life adventures could rival Superman's. The idea for this unusual comic book came about when the Japanese representative for Marvel Comics happened to be visiting the Franciscan Chapel Center office in Tokyo. Father Roy Gasnick, director of Franciscan Communications in New York, talks about that memorable day.
Over coffee, one of the friars said to Gene Pelk, who was the representative, why don't you do a comic book on St. Francis? And Gene sat back and thought for a while, and he said, well, why not?
Father Roy was ultimately responsible for writing the original storyline.
In the storyline itself, what I think is most important are certain values that Francis had, values that are so needed today. The whole questions of relationships of children with their parents and vice versa.
But high atop the towers of Manhattan during early discussions at the executive offices of Marvel Enterprises, President Jim Galton wasn't so sure that a comic book about St. Francis was such a good idea, but he changed his mind.
Today I'm a believer. I think my circulation director just came in a little while ago, as you know, and told us we're into our third reprint on the book.
With 350,000 copies already in print, the next step for the production department is to prepare foreign issues for international distribution in countries such as Spain, France, and Japan.
Hi, Mary Jo.
Hi, Father. Father, how you doing?
Very
We're just talking about the foreign versions of St. Francis.
We're going to be making this available to foreign publishers in two different formats. One is the American version, where they can just route out the English copy and put it in their own languages, as the Japanese did.
So, the dream has become a reality, and today, Francis, brother of the universe, can be found on comic book racks all over the country.
It's a very good feeling when you look at a stand and you do see Spider-Man and the Incredible Hulk and Superman, Batman, and right there in the middle of it, Francis, brother of the universe. What that comic book rack is saying is that Francis is a superhero like these other comic book characters are, but he's real, and they're not. I think Francis would be perfectly delighted to see a comic book about himself there, and I think Francis, who always thought of himself as a fool for God.
Billy Graham's first crusade was held in 1947 when he was still president of a college in Minnesota. Since 1965, an average of 300 television stations in the United States and in other English-speaking countries have carried his televised crusades.
Since the days of the apostles, those who call themselves followers of Jesus Christ have sought out the most effective ways to communicate his message. St. Paul, a tent maker by trade, became the earliest traveling preacher and was known as the Apostle of the Gentile for his attempt to communicate the gospel to the non-Jewish world. In the Middle Ages, mendicant religious orders were founded for the specific purpose of preaching the gospels to others. They were called mendicant orders because they lived off only the money they could beg for their ministry. But as cultures changed, so did the style of preaching. In the United States, preaching was primarily done from the church pulpit or at traveling Southern revivals. Today, the pulpit that reaches the largest audience is television. The man considered the patriarch of television evangelism is Reverend Billy Graham, a public speaker, author, family man, and pastor in the Baptist faith. He has been preaching for approximately 30 years and proved himself around the world as a master at the art of oration.
But there is no perfection outside of God. God is perfect. He is pure. And then the Bible says God is a God of judgment. Now, we don't like to think of that, what has been called the dark line in God's face. But it's there, and it's taught all the way through the Bible. God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil, says Ecclesiastes 12.
The message of the cross has always been controversial. In the days of the Apostle Paul, when he went to a town, he didn't look to see where the best Holiday Inn was, where he could stay. He looked for the jail because he knew he'd soon be there. And the gospel has always been controversial, wherever it's been carried.
Billy Graham recently led a crusade in Baltimore, Maryland, his first since May 1949. Baltimore has been given the nickname Graveyard of Evangelists. But in a press conference given before the beginning of the crusade, Reverend Graham said the city's reputation didn't scare him.
I have heard that about Baltimore. I'm not sure who gave the title Graveyard of Evangelists, but I've heard that in a lot of cities. They use the same expression in different cities, not all cities, but different cities we go to. And so Baltimore is not unique in that way, but you have not had here large-scale evangelistic meetings as some cities have had. And I think George Whitefield was here in the 18th century and held great meetings here at that time.
In the 1700s, it was George Whitefield's emotional mass meeting style that dominated the Protestant revivals. In the 1800s, it was Charles Finney, emphasizing that sinners should make an immediate decision to save their souls. In the 1870s, Dwight Moody and his singing companion Ira Sankey set the pace, perfecting the highly businesslike techniques that characterized the mass evangelists of the 20th century. And you can still see some resemblances of this in the Billy Graham crusades.
I think it's a lot curiosity, just to see, I don't know, because you see on TV when he saves a bunch of people are always walking down the aisles and all, and you think, that's fake, you know, it's got to be. And so people come to find out for themselves.
A lot of people in Baltimore need to know the Lord, and this is one way that they can find out.
Hopefully a lot of people are coming with the hunger to hear the word, but probably a lot of people are coming just out of curiosity to see him and to see what happens at a crusade after seeing him on TV so much.
In many ways, the Billy Graham crusade is an expanded version of the old Southern tent revivals, complete with song and prayer. Everything is designed to prepare the people to receive a message of redemption, preached to them in the best fire and brimstone tradition.
You can get religion. Go to a cult. Try drugs, try sex, try drink, try any of these things. To have a little peace and a little quiet, a little bit of something to give you relaxation and peace and happiness, and you don't find it. You find it only temporarily. Then it comes back with a greater problem than ever before.
Bob Shula has a vast church with many facets to that church. And he spends most of his time as pastor of that church. But he televises his church services. So in that sense, he's doing the work of an evangelist, as Paul wrote to Timothy. Timothy was a pastor, but Paul said, do the work of an evangelist. And so the man who's doing the pastoral caring also does the work of an evangelist.
Many of the Protestants, and particularly evangelicals, have received a great success using the electronic media to communicate their message. Catholics have not been as successful. The last success was probably the late Archbishop Fulton Sheen.
Do we realize that this universe of ours is full of orphans? Namely, the young that are begotten and completely forgotten. For example, the trees bear fruit, and the fruit lives an independent existence from the tree. Or you ascend a little bit higher, perhaps nature is kind to butterflies, because the butterflies never have to see how ugly is their young, at least at the beginning.
I think that one of the people who God used was Bishop Fulton Sheen in communicating the gospel to people. And the last time that I heard him, he had his cardiologist with him. I had been asked to stand by to take his place in case something happened to him. That was at the presidential prayer breakfast. I think it was Mr. Carter's last year as president. And but he got up, and I'd never heard him talk with greater vigor and greater strength. And he turned around and he looked at the audience and he said, "You're all sinners." Then he turned around to the president and he said, "And that includes you, Mr. President, and your wife. We all need the grace of God." Well, nobody could be any more direct than he was, and that communicated.
Over the years, Reverend Graham has been successfully able to establish himself as not only a spiritual leader, but as someone whose advice is sought after by dignitaries and leaders around the world. In January of 1981, Reverend Graham met with Pope John Paul II in Rome, and inevitably, the conversation turned to communicating.
I told him, that he was communicating with the people. And I said, you are reaching across the walls of the Vatican, and you've come down from the throne, and you're among the people.
You just gather all around, and after you've all come...
At Pentecost, the apostles were given the power to speak in tongues, so they could follow the command to preach the gospel to all nations. From that time on, Christians have preached from tree stumps to televised podiums, at times risking reputation, property, and even their lives to spread the word. And while the medium has certainly changed in the last 2,000 years, the essential message has stayed the same.
Some would argue about the value of modern television evangelization, saying that it's impersonal or that it's a potential challenge to regular local church participation. However, its ability to reach the largest audience is still unsurpassed.
Next week, we have the privilege of showing you a side of 76ers coach Billy Cunningham that you don't get the chance to see on the basketball court. He's a man devoted to his family and his faith, and it's these that he relies on to help him deal with the pressures of winning and losing. And in Los Angeles, we'll witness a true success story in the city's Hispanic community.
We would like to invite you to write us if you have any questions concerning this edition of our magazine or any questions in general. Our address is Reel to Reel, 222 North 17th Street, Philadelphia 19103.
Thanks for sharing this past half hour with us. We hope you've enjoyed it.
And we'd enjoy seeing you next week. Goodbye and God bless you.